Well, it's a very intimate setting here today, so tell you guys right now, if you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll try to see you through the bright lights and we can get as deep into the conversation as you'd like. So welcome to this session. I believe it's SE2 or SEC102. We're going to talk about a project that we've done with North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I'm Troy Moreland. I'm the founder and CTO of Identity Automation, and I'm also the service architect for this service that we've built. And with me is Sammy Carter, who's with the Friday Institute, and I'll let him explain the Friday Institute and who they are, but just know that from the services perspective, Sammy is the customer. He's my boss. So we're the vendor, and I'm going to talk about the project, and he's going to keep me honest. So go ahead, Sammy.
Thank you, Troy. As Troy said, I'm Sammy Carter from the Friday Institute at NC State University. The Friday Institute is part of the College of Education, and we were hired by the Department of Public Instruction to carry out the planning, procurement, and deployment efforts for something called the North Carolina Education Cloud Initiative. And there's about a dozen projects we've been working on. Identity management is one of those, and I've been leading that for the last 3 years.
There we go. So first of all, since I attend sessions a lot, I thought it would be nice if I talk about who is the appropriate audience for this session. And I may not cover all aspects, but this will give you an idea of the content anyway. So first of all, if anyone's interested in learning more about opportunities with identity management as a service, you're really going to like what you're going to hear. Whether it's a cloud service or an on-premise implementation, if you're someone that in your organization is responsible for identity management or aspects of security that deal with identity management, then this should also be very relevant. Anyone who's just looking for a use case of a traditional software company who's moved their implementation into the AWS as an infrastructure, this is, again, going to be a good conversation. And if you're cool, because that makes me feel better if you're cool and we're all having a good time. So a little bit of background before we get into the service itself. So who is Identity Automation? So basically we're a software company who specializes in identity, data, and access management. We have several commercial and public customers. The majority of our customers happens to be education. Just as an accident, we didn't design things to work with education, but it's certainly a strong suit of ours. Currently, our products manage over 3.5 million users across the US and Canada, and most of our customers have at least 20,000 identities that we keep in sync across n number of systems. And by the way, before I forget, we also have a booth in the Expo Center. It's booth 800, I believe, or right at the front, kind of in the middle. So if you have other questions, definitely feel free to come by and talk to us there as well. So about our products. So one product that we have today is called ARMS, the Access Request Management System. So this is the interface that end users and the administrators log into alike. So if it has to do with self-service, like I forgot my password, I want to update my mobile number, update my profile, things of that nature, that's what's going to be done within this tool. And then we do a lot with delegation. So an obvious delegation would be an example of, let's allow the help desk to log in and change somebody's password. A not so obvious delegation that is unique to our tool is the ability to say, let a teacher log in and change the password for one of their own students. So that's an example of kind of empowering a normal end user to do some pretty administrative focused things. The next product is DSS, or Data Synchronization System. So this is the back-end engine that has adapters that connects to all the different systems. So it takes a new hire from the HR system and creates you in the directory, creates you in Google Apps, creates you in Office 365, creates you in databases, et cetera. It also does data management. So if you're familiar with ETL, it's not limited to just identity management implementations. We just see it all as data, and you're moving it from one system to another. And then configuration management, AWS is a great example of that. So with our implementation for the North Carolina service, we're actually using DSS to not only provision accounts to all these systems, but also to provision the AWS environment. So if you've heard of auto-scaling that's available with AWS, we decided that it worked best for us to use DSS to set our own custom auto-scaling tools so we could look at more things related to our environment. So DSS actually brings up additional instances and shuts them down in that AWS environment. Our FIMS product is our Federated Identity Management tool. So if those of you are familiar with SAML, it's an identity provider. So if you have applications that your organization uses, specifically out in the cloud, like Salesforce or Google Apps, these systems that support SAML, then you stand up your own identity provider, and that will enable authentication to those outside systems to really come local. So you log in with your local credential. You don't have to maintain credentials in those outside systems. In the education space, especially higher education, SAML is becoming way more prevalent. I've seen some vendors out here in the booths that is their life to do SAML identity providers. That's certainly one aspect that we handle as well. And last on this list, it's not relative to the North Carolina service, at least not today, but I wanted to at least talk about it real quick, is our folder management system. So for those of you that are Windows or Active Directory shops and you have home directories and you have group shares and things of that nature, the FMS product automates the management of those based on events in the directory. So if we create a new AD user, it goes through FMS policies to decide where that user's home directory gets created, what rights it should have, what the quotas are, things of that nature. And if a group gets created, it can create a group share and give everybody unique directories within there. It's a very unique tool. So this is the simplified, typical architecture of any of our customers' implementations. So your directory, be it Active Directory or eDirectory or others, is the center point. We don't necessarily replace that. We can take advantage of what you have in place today. But you see DSS there at the top, talking to all these systems up above. Any of them can be source systems or target systems. It just depends on the situation. And we have multiple adapters that allow us to talk to all sorts of applications. Then you see the ARMS system on the left of the diagram, and that's representing end users coming from different devices and locations, logging into ARMS to do self-service and delegation. And you can see the FIMS service kind of on the top right, doing identity provider for cloud-based system authentications, and then FMS. At the bottom, we also have DMS. If you guys have purchased Android devices and need a way to manage them, lock them down, if you will. If that's something you're interested in, then please come talk to us, but it's a very specific use case for that product. So today, our implementations have always been traditional methods. So you buy our software, it's going to be deployed in your environment. It might be physical hardware, or if you've got a virtualization platform, then we help you install it there. You have the option of doing turnkey services with us to help you get the core infrastructure built and get the basic provisioning set up. And then we provide you with multiple support options. Very typical to any software purchase that you would make. So that means you're responsible as the customer for providing hardware, for keeping your staff trained, possibly hiring staff, and then the ongoing maintenance. Again, no different than any other software implementation. I'm pointing this out because what we do with North Carolina really changes that and changes our ability to provide our services in the cloud. So now talking about the North Carolina project specifically. So as Sammy mentioned, he's been working on this project for 3 years plus, from a research perspective, evaluation perspective. Really good article. I wish I could have posted that URL, but it just came out yesterday or the day before that talked about all the different identity management companies that they looked at. It was over 45 different software companies. And in the end, we met all the requirements. We did a proof of concept and was selected over a lot of the bigger software companies that do identity management that I'm sure you've heard. So we'll talk about what those requirements were. So first of all, again, Sammy probably covered this, but the NC Ed Cloud is just an initiative by the state of North Carolina's Department of Education to provide any services that they can come up with that add some sort of value to all the school districts. And then specifically, the NC Ed Cloud IAM is the project that we're working with. So we are the service provider of the NC Ed Cloud IAM service. So that's what we're talking about. So the goals of the NC Ed Cloud IAM are pretty awesome. So basically, for anyone who is an employee or a student or a parent or a guest of any of the school districts, and by the way, if y'all aren't familiar with schools, I'm going to say school district. North Carolina calls them LEAs, but I still stick with school districts. So any system that they access, whether it's a system that the state provides them, or if it's a cloud-based service, or in some cases even local systems that they have installed, we're wanting to give them one login to access all those systems. So it is a tremendous goal there. And because this tool is being provided at a state level, it's still important that we give the individuals the power to do self-service and to allow school district administrators to still be fully empowered to manage their accounts, just as if they would manage them if it was a local implementation. So those are the two primary goals that we needed to meet. So what do we actually do? So the state provides us with some source data, student data, and employee data. Starting next year, parent data, and allowing districts to self-service guests. But today it's 2 file feeds that we take from them, and we use that to provision accounts for everybody in the state. And then we've got a list of target systems, our downstream systems, that we're also including in the provisioning process. I'll describe to you what those are a bit later. As I mentioned, we're providing the SAML identity provider. So for those services, for those target systems that support SAML, we're providing the identity provider for that. And as I mentioned, we're providing the interface to support the self-service and delegated administration of identities. And we're also having to pull real-time metrics. So it's very important, a service that's this big, that we need to know the health of it. We need to know the usage of it. So we're talking about 250,000 active employees at any given time, 1.5 million students active at any given time. And that is our first year requirement, is to handle the provisioning of all of those accounts. Starting next year, we'll start adding in the guardians or the parents, which would roughly add another 3 million accounts, and then guests, which we have a complete question mark on that because we don't know what all that means at this time, but we're planning to have up to 10 million active accounts at any given time. So the target systems that we're talking about, first of all, there's a student information system, which the state provides. Every district has their own instance, and basically we get a feed from that, and that's the authoritative source for student data. There's also a state HRMS, which really is a combination of several systems that looks like a spider web diagram when you look at the architecture, but let's just say we get a single feed that comes from multiple systems that gives us 12 fields about an employee. So cloud email, specifically Google Apps for the first year. We'll probably do Office 365 for them next year. Directory services, so there's a directory at the state level that we manage as a core, and then we're allowing for provisioning to local directory services for each of the districts if they choose to do that. A content service, which is actually Discovery, like the Discovery Channel. They have a Discovery Education site for giving content to students. A library management system, a web content filter that many of the schools use, and a support system that we're using as our support tool for the cloud service. And every year we're on the hook for adding at least 10 more target systems. And I didn't mention this, but this is a 3-year project that has provisions to be extended for 4 or 5 or more years. So other interesting constraints. So the state absolutely did not want to host the solution. So like I said, we've always done traditional implementations. You buy the software, we help you deploy it in your environment, and we kind of help you out, and then we move into a support role. For the state, they require that this be a hosted solution because they didn't want to hire any new employees. They wanted to pay an all-inclusive annual subscription. Aren't you guys familiar with the identity management field, provisioning? I'm not going to call on you, I'm just curious. So it can be a complex venture. And so imagine asking for a state to tell you to provide them an annual cost up front for 3 years to do all of this that we've talked about, plus some of these other constraints. It was pretty intense. So they knew that the architecture was going to have to meet growth. We start with 2 million users, and we have to grow to at least 10 million users, and that's only counting the active users. There will still be deprovisioned users that have been in the system at some point that'll still be in there as far as the data. Must be highly available. Highly available is a big deal, and you can't be highly available if you just have 2 instances of something. You have to have multiple instances across multiple data centers to truly be highly available at all layers of the architecture. So again, that little bullet is a huge, huge deal. And then the state wanted to, or they've injected a cloud help desk team. So we talked about the NCED Cloud as a big overall list of services to be provided. This cloud help desk works with all of those services. So we had to make sure that we're not only delegating or empowering end users at the districts and their IT administrators, but we're also empowering this cloud help desk to be able to help all the school districts. So, fast forward a little bit, we have been awarded this project. So now Troy Moreland, CTO of Identity Automation, begins to get a little anxious. So we knew we had the software to do what needed to be done. There was no doubt about that. We've always had the software. That was one of the reasons why the state liked Identity Automation. But in the case of hosting, with all the constraints that I just told you, we did not have that at the time. So from our background of all being IT people, we thought, well, we can buy it. Well, that means we have to go and buy hardware, and the hardware alone would be more budget-wise than the entire 3-year budget that the state was going to pay for this service. So that wasn't going to work. We also estimated that had we bought the hardware, it was going to take us 10 to 12 months at least to get it all set up and configured and up and running. And in the end, we're a software company, not a hardware company. That was not something that sounded like fun to us. More concerns. What are we going to do about data security? So you guys may or may not have heard of PII. I've heard it more in this project than ever before. So the concern is we're not just dealing with employee information, we're dealing with student information. And I'm a father of a 3rd grader and a kindergartner, and it means a lot to me that we are doing our best to keep that data secure. And so long story short, there was a lot of investigation around that, and we absolutely got certification by AWS that information would absolutely be kept secure. It was a rule by the state for any service that only natural U.S. citizens ever have access to the data. AWS not only certified that for us, but they also certified that none of their employees have access to the data. So obviously that gave us a little warm fuzzy there. Then I started learning about all these audit requirements and certifications, and the state mandated that the service be SOC 2 compliant. So we had to go and read up on all that and what exactly all that meant. Thank goodness we found this website or this web page, and there's a typo there. It's amazon.com/compliance that proved that AWS as a service not only is SOC 2 certified, but a whole list of other compliance certifications that I was not even aware of until we started digging into that. So again, it made that really simple. So in short, just by the fact that we were going to go with AWS gave the state a very big warm fuzzy because all these requirements were going to be met. So more specifically, why we went with AWS as our choice for the infrastructure platform. I didn't actually look at Gartner Group at the time, but I've looked at it since. And if you guys have ever seen I believe it's the platform as a service analysis that they did, but AWS is not only in the leader quadrant, but they are, from your direction, I think this is right, they are in the top right most area of that quadrant that I've ever seen any result from analysis be. So they're far ahead of the competition for sure. So I was very glad to see that. It was just more of a certification for us that we chose the right product. The service offerings were a big thing for us. So we knew we were going to have to port our applications and services to the cloud, and the services they had available to us outnumbered anyone else that we saw. Plus, we saw opportunity there. There's a lot of services that we're going to use more of in the future, and we were glad to see those. And so the service offering, we couldn't find a comparison. Another big thing for us, we're a very web service API open architecture with our own products. And the fact that AWS is web service API driven, that's number one for them, made it a good fit for us as well. And I'll explain some of the things that we've done with that integration. So we chose AWS, and then we start talking about the solution itself. So this is a very simplified chart of how things flow. So anything in the dotted square box there is running inside the AWS cloud. The two files up top, those are the source files that the state provides us. We then take that data using our DSS product, and we do some mapping, merging, data cleansing, etc., and put that into an RDS instance that we call the person registry. From there, DSS picks it up and provisions to the state central directory, and then the services start working. So end users can log into ARMS. They're seeing their profile in that directory. They're doing their password self-service and what have you. We flow those changes then down to target systems. So some target systems we have to provision to. Google Apps is an example. You have to exist, and so part of the process is once you get created in the central directory, then we push it down and create you in Google Apps. The FIMS over there on the right, on your right, Google Apps, Discovery Education, Zscaler, the web content filter, all of those will be authenticating against the FIMS SAML identity provider. So making authentication and use of the tool as easy as can be for the end users. So again, very simplified view, but it shows you what exactly that we're doing here. Any questions about that or anything else thus far? I feel like I'm breathing and giving the opportunity to ask, but maybe I'm not. So what AWS services are we actually utilizing? Let me just kind of skip through these. I told you that we really like the service offerings that were laid out and that we took good advantage of those. So this is the complete list of everything that we're using. So Route 53 for DNS. Our services, or the instances that we have running, databases and instances, are obviously needing to be secure, so we have them inside all private VPCs. There's no direct access from the internet to any of that. We're using AIM so that we can secure that data for identity automation employees who are managing the solution. RDS for database, SES is the email service, notification service, CloudWatch for monitoring. All of our instances are running on either Windows 2012 instances or Amazon Linux instances. And then the ELB for load balancing the numerous instances of our product that we have running inside the cloud. Oh, and Amazon S3 and Amazon CloudFront. I'll explain those in a minute as well. So just to kind of geek out a little bit, I just wanted to show sort of how we're using the service. Sorry, you guys over there, you're not going to see my red indicator there, but the number should help you. So a typical login by an end user, so down there at the bottom where you see the client, they're just going to go to a web URL. It's my.ncedcloud.org, and that gets resolved to load balancers. Those load balancers are fronting numerous instances of our ARMS product. So as soon as you hit that, you're not authenticated. We're going to go off to our FIMS instances, which isn't on this chart, to authenticate you via SAML, and then you come back to ARMS. And in that, we've authenticated you against our central directory, which is running Active Directory. The configuration of ARMS is all in MySQL. Any audit event, so every time you log in, every time you change your password, every time you do anything, we're auditing or putting those audit logs into the RDS instance. S3 we're using for a few reasons, but in this chart, it's about the icons. So any icons that you have, there's an application launching portal in ARMS, and so the icons come from here. And our interface to ARMS actually is a little client that downloads into the web browser, and we put that client on S3 and use CloudFront to distribute it. And what that did for us was took a lot of load off of our ARMS instances on the initial login, and that's made a huge impact in our load testing. And then certain events that happen in ARMS, like if an administrator changes your password, an email gets sent to the end user. And for those types of emails, we're using that email service. And the geeky slides on the right, you don't really need to be able to read that. I'm just showing our architectural diagrams. We're using 3 availability zones for everything. So the RDS database is highly available across 3 zones. The Windows instances are across 3 zones with load balancers in front. And our ARMs, our FIMs, and our DSS instances are all distributed and highly available and auto-scaling up and down to meet the need of the current load. Any questions about that one? So I'm going to skip this slide because we weren't allowed to change our presentation, and I'm going to cover it later. I'm going to skip this one. All right. So, results. Did AWS save us money? So, we didn't have to hire anyone specifically to maintain infrastructure. So, obviously that saved us money that we never had to spend. We didn't have to acquire any physical hosting space because we didn't have it to begin with. We didn't buy any hardware. We didn't have to go to an ISP to get new service, and we didn't have to manage the build out. So again, high availability, we would have had to have found 3 data centers. We would have had to have ordered all that hardware, so all the services you saw that we were using, load balancers, networking gear, servers to run all the instances, it just would have never happened. So I can't equivalent that to a dollar amount, but it would be over $10 million. As far as time savings, this slide's also kind of messed up. This is supposed to be 2 bullet points, but I'd said earlier that we had estimated that had we bought the hardware ourselves and hired the people to do it, it was going to take us 10 to 12 months to get all that infrastructure built. The next bullet is, with AWS, we built our first development environment in a day, and that's with very little knowledge at that time of AWS and its services and how it works. Later on, when we got to the testing phase, this was the first time that we were really going to build an environment that was going to look exactly like what we thought production was going to look like. So in that, we're learning it as we go. We did a lot of trial and error, a lot of testing, a lot of learning, and still got the test environment built in about 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks of man hours. And then production, we already had the plan, we already knew what we needed to do, deployed in probably less than 5 days, but give or take 5 days, and those other bullet points are just kind of giving you an idea. So we were using the equivalent of 3 data centers, a database across all 3, several server instances across all 3. It's incredible, quite honestly, to have that much done in 5 days. We would have never been able to do that. So other value was the compatibility of our products with the AWS service. So for example, we're a provisioning company, so guess what we do with the AIM users and groups? We provision them. So when an identity automation employee comes on and they're going to work on this project, we can automatically provision their account, assign them to a group, and they've got permissions to manage the AWS environment. If they leave the group, or if they leave this project, or they leave the company within less than 5 minutes of them being deprovisioned, they would lose their access in the IAM service. So that was very important from a security perspective. I kind of mentioned earlier that we use our products to do the auto-scaling of the environment, and that's just kind of because when we were first looking at this, there were limits of what auto-scaling could be based on. We needed to be based on more scheduled base. So we're looking at schedule. So if you can imagine education, everyone kind of comes in around 8 o'clock. So at 8 o'clock, the logins are going to be numerous as opposed to distributed across the day. So we're going to have more instances up between 7 and 9 a.m. than at other times of the day. So that was an example of why we use our own product to kind of handle the auto-scaling. And then we're also using DSS to pull a lot of metrics from the environment, so we know how many instances are running, the CPU utilization, et cetera, so that we can gather all that information and throw it into a repository for reporting. Enterprise support. So we thought it made nothing but perfect sense for us to work with AWS and buy into the enterprise support, since as a service, we're responsible for the infrastructure, not just the applications. It doesn't matter who we picked for an infrastructure, it's identity automation's responsibility. So the enterprise support option gave us the service level that we needed to support the state service level agreement with us. Not to mention, that also gave us an extension of our team. We've got dedicated contacts within AWS. We work with 3 of them constantly. One of them was here. Christian, you still in there? Yeah, Christian's still here. Thanks. So again, prevented us from having to hire even more staff. And I'll just say that to this point, they've been a blessing. They've been great to work with and have helped us a lot. Any questions? What time is it? Got about 10 minutes, is that right?
It's 3:30.
Oh, we got a lot of time, good.
And then switch over.
So there's not a whole lot to the demo. Let me just kind of give you a little background of it. I just wanted to give you a visual, kind of what does it look like to the end users, and because that would help kind of solidify what we've been talking about. So I'm using the test environment. The test environment is loaded with all the real data. I'm going to be logging in with our test users that are in the environment, though, because personally identifiable information is something that we're still strict about, so I'll do my best. In fact, I will guarantee not to expose any of that data. But we're using the test environment for that reason, because I have test accounts in it. But when I'm logging into all of this is all running in AWS. This is not my laptop even, so this is the real deal. First of all, I've got 3 different user accounts I'm going to log in as to give you an idea of the different perspectives when they log into the service. So this, by the way, that we're looking at is the SAML login page. And I'm going to log in as somebody that's in that state-level cloud help desk group. So basically, they've been delegated to be able to manage user accounts from anywhere in the state, or for any users in any of the school districts across the state. So this is the ARMS interface. When you log in, we've got several modules on the left there. So the first thing that the users are going to see are links to all the target systems that have been provisioned for them. So based on who they are is going to determine what icons you see. So for Mark, who's logged in, he's going to be limited. He's not a real end user. He's an administrator. But for example, there's a wiki site that we built for training information and documentation. So when you click on that, you can see that M. Scheibel, via single sign-on, he was logged into that site. So an example of single sign-on. He's also able to log into the support site, and this is using Remedy Force, who supports SAML. So because we've already logged in once to establish our SAML session to even log into ARMS, logging into Remedy Force was a snap. And just to skip around a bit, account management. So all end users would see their own profile similar to this, and this is all information coming from the directory. In Mark's case, because he's in the cloud help desk, he's been given escalated privileges, so he sees these tabs, which gives him the ability to manage any employee or student or guest or external user in the state. So to make sure I don't show you a real user, let me come in here and show you everybody that's in our test school district, which is AA1. So in however long that just took, it discovered 26 users out of the 2 million users that exist in that environment. And as you can see, they're all fictitious users. So for example, we've got a Susan teacher user, and because I'm an administrator, I've been given access to the details of all the information, so they can always validate that provisioning is working properly. So point being, the delegated administration. Under file access, to show you something else kind of cool, each of the school districts, one of the smaller requirements was that they all have access to their own user data and audit information of things that have happened in this service. We thought of a lot of different ways that we could do that. What we ended up with is when the district, it's a choice whether or not they want to have that. If they want that, we're going to provision them an S3 bucket. And then through our file access module we have in ARMS here, we're able to display Windows shares, WebDAV shares, or S3 buckets. So in this case, I'm displaying an S3 bucket for the AA1 school district. And in here you can see I have access to download my user data, which is in a delimited file, or the audit logs for basically any actions that have been taken against my users. You know, speaking from the aspect of I'm a school district administrator. All right, I'll leave those for now. So let me log out and log back in now as Susan Teacher. So this is more of a end user perspective now. You'll notice the usernaming convention. That's a fun conversation. If you think about constraints that might come out of having to create unique identities for an entire state that has to be secure, no PII in it, we'll tell you about our challenges there in coming up with the usernaming convention, which is, just so you know, it's randomly selected. First 4 characters are always alpha, last 4 characters are always numeric digits. So logging in as Susan, you might immediately notice there's been some changes. There's fewer modules on the left, different icons available from the launching perspective. So for example, we provisioned Susan Teacher with a Google Apps account. So again, with one click, thanks to SAML integration, that was an easy authentication. So Susan is almost a typical employee. So she's going to be able to see her own profile. And again, this is information that comes from an authoritative system that we've just provisioned for her, so it's always good to have a validation there. She can change her password. On the login page was a link that you would go through to reset a forgotten password. We're enabling a white page lookup, so anybody within a district is going to be able to look up someone else in their district. So again, that query is actually going against the entire domain, but it's just being filtered to only expose users that are in my same district. Because she's a teacher, we've given her an additional delegation. So these are all of the students that are currently in a schedule that has them in her class. So Susan, we talk about this all the time in our meetings, how as soon as you start giving students logins, especially at the secondary level, then they're going to come into class and say, I don't know my password, I can't log in, can't do my work. And typically, the teacher would have to call the help desk. By the time the help desk can get around to changing the password, class is over. So right in here, right in the classroom, the teacher can log in and change Jimmy's password. And we've made it really simple, so they can provide a password or, well, there's supposed to be a set to default here that apparently that doesn't show up right for Jimmy student. But anyway, it's supposed to give them the option to set it back to default, and we've exposed the student's password to the teachers, what that default password is, so that should be what they should be able to log in as. Okay, that's good for Susan Teacher. One more login, and this example is someone who is considered a school district IT administrator. So first I'm going to show how this person was even given this escalated privilege. So any employee could have gone down to the workflow module and gone to requests, and they're going to see these exception roles, as we call them. They're exceptions because the data that comes from the state regarding an employee doesn't give us enough information to automatically give you one of these roles. So they're going to be done by an exception basis. The way you do an exception basis is to request them via our workflow module. So this end user had clicked on LEA administrator role, submitted it, it went through an approval process, and in the end, that granted them permissions necessary to log back into the tool and now be an administrator for their LEA. So the main difference here is that they have delegation tabs, manage my LEA employees, just do that. So this is everybody that's in my LEA, and I'm going to allow that LEA administrator to change passwords, make the end user reset their challenge questions. It was a requirement, and unfortunately we've had enough education customers where this is not uncommon, but if someone gets terminated in a not so nice way, sometimes you have to get that account disabled prior to the data telling you that the account's been terminated. So we're even letting the LEA administrators use the disable function so that they can ensure that access is immediately removed for that employee. And same for students and such. And from the file access perspective, they would have visibility to their S3 bucket with their data. So that was important for them. Lastly, none of the other users I logged in as, well, at least Susan Teacher, didn't have this sponsorship tab. So I told you that we're going to handle guest accounts in the future in a more broad manner. The sponsorship module here is for dealing with what we call temporary guest accounts. So if the LEA absolutely needs a user account to be created that's not coming from the HR feed, then they can go ahead and come to sponsorship and create Mickey Mouse or whomever they want. And what happens is we limit the account to only be active for a maximum. I'm clicking on the date control, and it's limited to 30 days. So you can create the user that you need. So the idea is there's a lot of school districts that locally have wireless access. And to use the wireless access, you have to have a credential in your directory. And if we didn't allow this, then that would kind of be a bummer. So someone comes in and do a presentation like myself, and I want to do a demo and get out to the internet so I can show you that demo, they'd have to work around and call IT and do all this mess. But now the LEA administrator can just come in here and create that access within a minute or two. That credential would be synchronized down to the local school district, and that person will be able to log in. And if it's longer term than 30 days, that still works. Whoever's the sponsor is just going to get a nagging email letting them know that, hey, you've got a sponsored account that's going to expire pretty soon if you don't take any action. If they don't take any action, we're going to automatically deprovision the account. That's kind of the key. So, but otherwise, they can reattest. But that's pretty much what I had to show from a demo perspective. Yes? Yeah, so the question was, when you disable accounts, are they ever getting deleted? So, we base that on the requirements that the customer gives us. So the way we're doing it in North Carolina is as soon as somebody gets from the source file, we know that someone goes inactive. And so when that comes in, we immediately disable the accounts, but we also are setting the current date into a deprovision date attribute. And then we've got a separate process that runs nightly or weekly that's constantly looking, do I have any accounts that are disabled whose deprovision date is older than a certain threshold, like 45 days or 60 days, I forget what the threshold is. And at that time, if anybody that meets that criteria, we start looking for their accounts in all downstream systems, and we start deleting them. So if you have a Google Apps account, it would have already been disabled, but we would delete it at that time. And once we're absolutely certain that all target systems that you exist in have been fully deleted, then we mark the central directory account as being, we give it a delete date, which would tell us that everything downstream has been deleted. But we've chosen to keep the central directory accounts at the state level. We're going to keep them there indefinitely because they're the authority of usernames. It's very important for us that usernames never get reused, never get changed. I can tell you more about why there, but those are some more constraints from a security perspective that we chose to do that. We got a lot of time, so go ahead.
So in my place, if someone gets fired, how do you accommodate that?
Yeah, so if someone gets terminated, we're going to automatically, and I'm going to repeat the question by stating it another way. So if someone gets terminated, we're deprovisioning their access. That's what I just explained, that would happen automatically. But what if, say, that person's manager needs access to log in as that account to get access to email or files or what have you? So that is the whole purpose of enabling the district administrators to override the disable, and they can click on that enable account. And that would immediately enable the account, and it would go downstream and find everywhere that you exist in other target systems and enable those accounts as well. And if you want to ensure that the provisioning process does not override that, we gave an override flag. So enabling or disabling the account takes immediate effect, and if you want to lock that account to not get any more updates from the source, from our automated provisioning, then you would just check that, and now the automated process will not touch that user anymore. And we also gave a view of that, if you will, because you don't want override flags to be there indefinitely, so we want to make it really simple to see that flag. Yes, sir?
So this may not necessarily apply to your use case, but as state and educational departments and other government organizations move towards biometric forms of identification, have you explored maybe integrating a separate tier of authorization using biometrics, indexing, matching, leveraging info?
Yeah, so the question is, are we looking at biometrics as a way to make the authentication and such stronger, specifically using AWS services? What I can tell you is we are focused on multi-factor first. So biometrics would be a method of multi-factor, and the multi-factor methods that we're looking at today are utilizing the devices that everybody has today, like your cell phone. And we've got a couple of options there. There's what we call the poor man multi-factor authentication, where it's a combination of what we configure in ARMS and DSS to where you would be texted a code. So without any other service, you would be texted a code, and then you would use that as your second factor, so credentials plus that. And we're looking at adding other cloud services that provide multi-factor tokens, and we will be looking at biometric. I can talk to you more about that, about our future roadmap regarding that as well. Yes?
Questions. Quickly, can you touch on what you did to provide authorization for access to the S3 to individuals, whether you're storing keys or whether you're integrating with IAM, or how you're doing that?
Right, so the question was, how are we doing that integration to expose the S3 buckets to the user interface? And the answer to that is today we are, the configuration within ARMS is expecting to have the access key and secret key for that interface. So we are certainly going to look at doing roles and other things to do better with that.
The other question is, have you looked at other federation models such as OAuth2, OpenID, OpenID, where does that stand?
Sure, and the question was, from a federated authentication perspective, are we looking at alternatives to just SAML? And yes, we're looking at OAuth. Right now, that's the only other one that we're looking at, but yes, we are constantly looking at that, absolutely. Any other questions? Sammy, do you have anything you wanted to add? Oh, yes, sir.
Can you tell us how much it costs per month?
Good question. Talk to me afterwards, and I'll give you a better answer. Off the top of my head, I really don't. Not as much as we thought when we were trying to figure it out and budget it in advance. I can tell you that. We've also changed the instance types and things of that nature that we thought we would need eventually, and we keep testing and reducing and reducing and reducing to make sure we're getting the performance we need. And our database instance is not nearly as big as we thought it needed to be. The EC2 instances that run our product on Amazon Linux, we thought we needed bigger than what we ended up doing, and we did a lot of load testing to determine all of those factors. Yep.
Did you say that you were entering users into all the other systems, or in some cases do you have to have a data vendor that matches up?
Ask that second part of your question again.
Do you actually provision users into all of the systems, or in some cases do you type in the fact that there's a user into the
So the question is, do we automatically provision the users into the other systems that we mentioned, or are we ever having to kind of do it by hand, right? So it is 100% automated. So Google Apps is an example. So when we get a new user, for example, from the source feed, we determine which school district they're associated with, and then we have rules or policies that say, does that school district, are they using Google Apps? And if the answer is yes, then at that time we immediately provision them an account in Google Apps. It takes less than 5 minutes when we're provisioning all 2 million users, as we're doing deltas. There's some applications like the web content filter that the state uses, which is called Zscaler. It's 100% SAML integrated, meaning we didn't have to pre-provision the user. The SAML interface that Zscaler uses is provisioning the user on demand. And we're providing attributes about the user that assigns them to the appropriate web content filter policies. So when you log in, even though I've never provisioned you into that system, it knows that I'm a third grade student, and it locks me down to what websites I can go to, just based on the information that we pass it. Did that answer your question? Okay. Saw a hand over there, I think.
I saw mention of chaos monkey idea. What sort of testing are you doing right now in your infrastructure?
So none in production that is that risque, not risky, but risque. But it is absolutely something that, I was here attending AWS reInvent last year, and quite honestly, that Netflix presentation where they were showing all that was fascinating, and how they proved that by implementing Chaos Monkey, and if there's anyone here that isn't familiar with that, Chaos Monkey is one of several open source tools that Netflix has developed that basically goes into your environment and finds random instances and kills them. And that's the best way to validate, arguably, that your environment is truly highly available. And so I absolutely, they showed in their diagrams that their uptime improved by randomly killing instances because they learned from it, and yeah, it sounds like a great idea, and we plan on doing that, Sammy. I told you that, right?
Love killing things.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks for showing up, and thanks for sticking around. And like I said, you can come up here for a while, or we'll be in the booth 800. And thanks a lot. Have a good rest of the show.